So first, as always, I'd like to emphasize that no one's content is perfect, including ours. It's definitely not. We're all going to make mistakes, and what's important is that we learn from those mistakes and together we commit to doing better. So let's start off with some background. The university is required by law to ensure that its websites are accessible. Our accessibility standard is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, also called WCAG 2.1 level AA success criteria. It's a bit of a mouthful. These guidelines help our content and our websites overall to be perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Now, what we're all actually here for, though, is the review process. So, as part of our continued efforts to improve and maintain accessibility, the UCM Digital Team will be conducting random reviews of websites within the CMS on a quarterly basis. But don't be alarmed, we're going to go into detail on this and hopefully allay any fears. A randomly generated number, thanks Google, will determine the website to be reviewed, and areas of the CMS managed by the same individuals won't be selected twice in a row. We want to avoid placing an undue burden on those folks, as well as to ensure that we have more of a variety of content being reviewed. So what we'll do is we'll reach out to the website that's chosen their content manager, and we'll ask for the website's 10 most visited pages. That's over the past 3 months. Those 10 pages will comprise the inventory of pages to be reviewed. So the digital team will then review those pages. We'll use a content-focused accessibility checklist. And once the review is completed, we'll meet with the website's content managers and contributors to discuss the findings and go over how to correct any issues. From there, the website's content managers and contributors will have a month or so to correct any issues before the pages are reviewed once more. Ideally, the whole process will take over 3 months to avoid any adverse impact on day-to-day responsibilities. We'll also try to be aware of not selecting a website for review during a time that's historically busy for that unit. But if you're chosen and there's something that would impact your area's ability to participate at that point in time, let us know. This is meant to be a collaborative learning experience and not like an extra heavy weight on your shoulders to deal with. So before we move on, does anyone have any questions?
No questions submitted in the chat, so I think we're good to move forward.
Okay, so now we'll talk about the checklist. So earlier I mentioned we'll be using a content-focused accessibility checklist. I'd like to go over it with you now, but we'll also be making it available to everyone in the CMS user guide. That way you can use it for your content, even if your website's not currently being reviewed. It's currently live now in the general website information section of the user guide, and we'll go ahead and we'll put the link in the chat if Grace or Annalise could pop it in there. And also, excitingly, Annalise is also working on translating it into an abridged PDF version to be used in tandem with the user guide version on the website. So the checklist in the user guide will provide an explanation for each test, and many include links to the CMS user guide for further guidance. And during the review process, we'll also provide a spreadsheet containing each test that we will allow our team and yours to go through, make notes regarding each page's compliance as we're reviewing those top 10 pages. So let's go through the checklist one by one, and we'll answer questions at the end. Let me share another screen. Oop. Can everyone see that okay?
Yes.
Okay, and I've zoomed it in, so hopefully that's a bit helpful. So this is the checklist as it is in the CMS. Oops, I have one toggled open already. So we've broken it out into several categories, and we'll start at the top with the general category. The first test for your page's content is, does the page's title accurately describe the content of the page? So page titles should be concise, distinct, and descriptive. The page titles can appear in search results in like the little top browser tabs, and they're also the default value that shows up when you bookmark a page. So, sometimes you get like those really, really long things or things that don't really make any sense. Page titles. The next one is, are there multiple ways to navigate to a page? So users should ideally have more than one way to find your web pages. So some acceptable options are the main navigation of your website, side navigation, search results, the sub navigation that's in sometimes like the drop-down menus in main navigation. Ideally, feel like your content isn't just funneled from one page. An exception to this could be if it's a page that's like a step in a process kind of thing, because then it wouldn't make much sense outside of that process. So that's general. And now we go on to my BFF headings. So first, do headings on the page actually use heading tags? If something functions as a heading, don't just bold it. Utilize the blocks drop-down menu in the WYSIWYG editor. Usually by default it says paragraph. You want to change the text into a heading of the proper level. So with levels, do headings avoid skipping levels? So generally in the CMS, your normal text pages use headings 3 to 6, and gallery pages, and I think some news pages, like news articles, use headings 2 through 6. So you don't want to skip over headings unless you're closing a subsection. So for example, heading 3 followed by heading 4 works, and heading 5 followed by heading 3, because we're closing the section, going back up, that works. You don't want to do heading 3, heading 5. You're missing that heading 4 in the middle. And then are headings only used to organize content and not to style check text? This is like the inverse of the first one, how you don't want to bold text that should be a heading. You don't want to make text a heading when it's not a heading at all. If your text needs to be emphasized in some way, that's when you should use bold or italic, not the heading tags. So as you can see, these are like quick tests for you to help review of the content on the page and easily check things off as you go. So with links, does your link text indicate to a user what the destination is? Using text such as CMS user guide versus click here helps users determine what will happen if they use the link. So you want to avoid those ambiguous kind of phrases. And now the bane of some of our existence, images. Images are great. They help break up content. They help encourage understanding, but they can also be a little bit troublesome when it comes to determining what the appropriate alt text is. So first, do images have appropriate alt text? What's considered appropriate can really vary depending on the image and the context in which it's used. So I like to consider, how would you describe this image to another person? So you want to avoid using phrases like picture of or image of, unless it's kind of a descriptive term that helps convey further meaning of the image, like this is a watercolor illustration of a manatee painted by Grace Beck, kind of thing. And then are small amounts of text and images included in the alt text? We really prefer to avoid putting text and images, but if it's something that needs to be done and it's unavoidable, include it in the alt text. So that way, users who can't see the image still receive that same information and it's still present on the page. And then moving on to large amounts of text and images like your infographics and such, we still need to make sure that that text is available in a manner that's accessible. So the CMS user guide page has examples of how to use alt text to provide kind of like a short description of the image, like this is an infographic about XYZ, full description to follow. You want to have those directions on where they can locate the rest of the text of the image, the rest of the actual written out text of the text that's in the image. It should be included after the image or linked immediately onto another page. Now, this is where images and links come together and form linked images. When you link an image, and this is what I'm still getting used to, in retrospect it makes sense, but still that learning curve right there. If an image is linked, users need to know where that link goes versus what the image description is. They want to know what happens if they use that link. Having an image that says students sitting under a tree doesn't tell them that, oh, this link actually goes to like the CMS user guide or something like that. Now, color and other sensory characteristics. This is the first one test here is kind of tied to text and images. So we need to ensure that text has enough contrast so users with low vision can still perceive it. Regular text, just like your normal run-of-the-mill text, has to have a contrast of at least 4.5 to 1. Large text, which is generally 14 point or 18 and a half pixels, and bold or larger, or 18 points and 24 pixels or larger, that needs to have a contrast of at least 3:1. If your text is on a gradient, you need to check where the contrast is lowest. However, you don't need to worry about it if the text is incidental. Like if you're looking at a photograph of something on campus and you can see like the little street sign, that text, you don't have to worry about the contrast being good. It's not important to the whole image. And it also doesn't matter if it's a logo or a brand name. We do have tools linked in the CMS user guide for helping to determine contrast ratio. I personally use the WebAIM one a ton, almost every day. Now, further things that have to do with color and other sensory characteristics. So sensory characteristics are things like shape, color, size, location, orientation, sound. If you're using any of these things to provide information, you want to also use text in addition to that. So you're not relying only on click the green button at the bottom. Like, okay, what if they can't tell that something's green? Click the green button at the bottom labeled next would then be a sufficient instruction. And for our infographic friends again, in charts and stuff, so you want to make sure that you're adding text and or patterns into the mix, because again, you don't want to be conveying information by only one method of color, for example. So you could also use a table to present the data. So you can have a bar graph where you have like a green bar, a red bar. Oh, but this one also has stripes and this one has polka dots. So there's multiple ways to tell it apart. And now our friend, the table. You want to make sure that when you're using tables, you don't use them for layout or design. If you need to display your content in a certain way and you feel like a table would help accomplish that, like, oh, make it 2 columns kind of thing, put down the WYSIWYG editor, step away from it, reach out to us. We're happy to help. Maybe we have something already that can help you lay out the content. Maybe we don't, and we can work on it together, but put the table down. Don't do it. Now, when you do have a table that is being used for tabular data, does it have a caption? The table snippets available in the CMS, bordered table, bordered and striped table, those all have the correct markup by default. With those pre-built ones, they have those captions on by default, and they function kind of as a heading for the entire table. Now, do those tables also have a header and table header cells? Once again, if you've used the table snippets that are in there, a table header and its corresponding cell elements will already be in place. Any additional columns that you add to the table will automatically include a table header cell. So if you add the right click, add the table row or table column, boop, it automatically populates it there. We have the instructions on how that works. If by any chance you need to change a table header cell or anything like that, that's all in the CMS user guide checklist. Now, are those table header cells that are automatically there associated with their corresponding data cells? So you have the table header cell at the top of the column, make sure those rest of the cells in the column are related to it. So scope is used to convey that a table header cell is associated with its column. Those table snippets do have the scope set by default on the table header cells, but unfortunately, scope of new columns is not set. So new columns get that table header cell, but it doesn't have its scope set. So a bit annoying, but to do so, you right click within that new table header cell, select cell from a menu that appears, then select cell properties, and change the scope from none to column. And again, we have the instructions right here, so you can follow those along. And also, we want to try to reduce complexity of tables so that assistive technology has the best chance of accurately conveying information. So you want to avoid having spanning columns, spanning rows, just have it be simple, normal gridded tables. Okay, documents. All documents on a page need to be accessible, and documents includes word processing documents like the stuff you get from Microsoft Word, spreadsheets, either Excel or Google spreadsheets, presentations like PowerPoint, and PDFs. So the user guide has links to both Microsoft and Adobe instructions on creating accessible documents. They tend to be a bit intense, so it's a bit more than we can put on the site, but you can review those and they're super helpful. And also when you're in certain software like Adobe PDF or Microsoft Word, PowerPoint, like I made the PowerPoint earlier today, there's a little thing at the bottom that says accessibility and you can, it says go to go or investigate and you can click that and it provides you with some guidance on what needs to be fixed and how you can go about doing so. So now media. Can embedded third-party elements that start automatically be paused or stopped? So this is like putting a YouTube video on the page or like a SoundCloud file, things like that. You need to make sure that anything that moves, blinks, scrolls can be paused or stopped. For example, in our CMS, the hero videos and rotators, they have pause buttons added. So that way a user is able to just go boop and turn it off if it's bothering them or they need more time to view something. And related, you also want to make sure that there's nothing on your page that could trigger photosensitive seizure disorders. You want to avoid flashing content, err on the side of caution, don't put it in there. I highly recommend checking out the official WCAG documentation for further details. We have it linked on the page because it's a little bit more than I can go into. And I'm not a video person, so I'm worried that I might explain it incorrectly. So please check it out if you're making video. You probably understand it much better than I would. And then finally, more generic audio and video, specifically when it comes to conveying that information, are transcripts or captions available when necessary. So if the content of whatever the media is can be understood without a visual element, then a transcript is necessary because they can read it or perceive it while still listening, but not needing to be paying attention. If the visual element is necessary, though, to fully understand alongside the audio, then captions are appropriate. Captions are also required if the live audio is synchronized with another format, such as video. They aren't required, though, if the audio is acting as an audio description, so which is kind of like alt text for a video, I guess you could say. Like Charlotte motions towards the camera kind of thing. Now, are those captions accurate? You want to make sure that your captions include dialogue, speaker identification, like if there's multiple speakers going on, meaningful sounds, like if you're watching Netflix sometimes you'll hear like menacing noises or anything like that on screen, like that's a meaningful sound that's then being conveyed via the captions. And you also want to try to use correct capitalization and punctuation when understanding would be affected, like if it's an acronym or things like that. Now, automatic captions, like I say here, they're a great starting point, but as we know, sometimes they can make things a little bit wonky. So you can start with automatic captions, but just review them for accuracy and make adjustments where needed. And like I just mentioned about audio descriptions and things like that, you want to make sure that any on-screen information is conveyed audibly. So if the necessary information of video is not provided by the audio, then that audio description I mentioned might be necessary to ensure that all information is conveyed. So again, I'm not a video person really, so I've linked out to the WCAG documentation on it so you can get some more information there if that is something that you're responsible for. And that's the accessibility checklist that we'll be using for the website review process.